The Theater History Podcast is supported by HowlRound, a knowledge commons by and for the theater community. It's available on iTunes and HowlRound.com.
Hey everyone, a quick note before we begin this week. We're going to have one more interview in our series on Spanish Golden Age theater, but we're going to hold it over until April. We'll be talking to Esther Fernandez at the Chamizal Festival, but we've decided to hold that interview until the festival actually occurs. So, mark your calendars and look forward to late April when we'll be talking once more about Spanish Golden Age theater. Okay, here's the show. Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm Mike Leager. Sinclair Lewis's 1930s novel, It Can't Happen Here, was adapted to the stage and has been getting a number of revivals recently. Here to talk with us about that is Paul Gagliardi, who earned his PhD at UW-Milwaukee and has two upcoming publications on the Federal Theater Project's comic plays and their relationship to work. Most recently, Paul has written an article for HowlRound talking about some of these recent revivals of this 1930s play. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Michael, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So for those who might not know, what is It Can't Happen Here, and what's it about?
So the play is based off Sinclair Lewis's novel of the same name, and it's set in a alternate kind of history of the 1930s where a Huey Long type politician is elected president of the United States, and he runs on we'll call it presently a Donald Trump sort of campaign of broad promises and sort of the fascist rhetoric, and so both stories center on sort of the growing resistance to the buzz, the fascist president's new administration. And it mostly centers on this character in Vermont named Dormus, who is a newspaper editor, and how he becomes the sort of the leader of this underground movement to combat the fascist American president. Eventually Dormus is put in prison in the play, and I think in the novel too. And in the novel, the United States basically breaks apart into like 3 or 4 separate governmental agencies. And the play ends on sort of like this what will happen kind of note. So yeah, it's very much a product of the 1930s because there is the fear of Hitler and Mussolini in Europe, and sort of demagoguery of certain political figures in the United States. So it's an anti-fascist play and a kind of alternate history, I guess, for lack of a better word.
And a novel with a villain whose delightful name is Buzz Windrip.
Buzz Windrip, yes.
Gotta love a name like that. Talk to me about the journey that this novel took from page to stage. I understand it was rather vexed.
Yeah, so in Hallie Flanagan's memoir, Arena, she has an entire chapter dedicated to It Can't Happen Here. And it's actually my favorite chapter for memoir because she begins the chapter by saying, we don't know whose idea it was to put this thing on. And it is this wonderful chapter of he said, she said, all the problems that went into this production. So whoever in the Federal Theater Project proposed the idea, they reached out, the agency reached out to Sinclair Lewis, and he agreed to pen a stage script for this play. And he also brought on John C. Moffat to be a secondary writer. At some point in the writing of the play, both Lewis and Moffat stopped speaking to each other. And so Flanagan details in her memoir of having to hire runners to go between Sinclair Lewis's hotel room and John C. Moffat's hotel room. And they would slide edits and ideas under the floor to, the runner would slide ideas to Lewis and vice versa. And it just, I guess the easiest way to say it is nothing about this went right in the transfer from book to play. There's stories that as the FTP central agency is sending out copies to its various theaters, the San Francisco unit would say, okay, we really like this, what we have so far, but we don't have the next 3 acts finished. And so there's stories of Lewis just changing things midway through rewrites. And it's just a cluster of everything that could possibly go wrong from novel to play. And it's interesting, too, because Lewis had this really odd relationship with the novel, too, because a lot of Lewis's novels are they're pretty straightforward and they're very satirical. And I think he felt this weird relationship with the novel because in the novel, and you said you read it over the summer, that like he doesn't really spare any political group or ideologue. Like he's pretty, he attacks basically everyone from the left to the center to the right. And I love this story that he was invited by Genevieve Taggart to the American Writers, I think the American Writers Congress, for a luncheon to celebrate the novel. And he was probably drinking and went to the luncheon and said, "None of you people know what my novel's about. You've all misinterpreted it." And so I think as well, like when he was writing the play, he wanted to make it more more hard-hitting politically and not as sort of plague on everyone's houses, but sort of condemning of this fascist impulse in America. And I think because of all those reasons, you have this really crazy, rewriting of the novel for the play version. So.
Now, we've talked on this podcast before about how certain Federal Theater Project productions landed the project in hot water, our episode with Amy Brady, for instance. Obviously, this looks like some pretty politically charged material. How did people respond to this in the 1930s?
Like almost every play of the FTP, you had the conservative press in places like Boston, San Francisco, Dallas, the South, that saw it as an attempt to comment upon the political process in the United States. When Lewis wrote the novel in 1935, I mean, he sort of had Huey Long in his mind as the template for Buzz Winthrop. And so when in 36, when it's produced by the FTP, a lot of conservative critics see it as the agency commenting upon the 1936 election. Liberal readers saw it as this really great, condemnation of people like Hitler and Mussolini. But really the sort of just across the political spectrum, people just see it as an interesting play, but not a good play. And if you look at the press reviews from all these different places, that's sort of the repeated ideas. Yeah, Lewis has some really interesting ideas, but the play, it's not good. And that's kind of interesting to me that, they look, the aesthetic quality of the play comes through and the ideological breaks still occur. But
now, like you said, this has not been a terribly popular revival because it's got some problems, arguably, with its quality. But in the last year or so, it's become much more frequently revived. What have been some of the major revivals that we've seen? What are their stated reasons, the various theater companies, for bringing this play back?
So the big one was at the there have been, I guess let me backtrack a little bit. There have been a lot of staged readings of the play, in places like New York, San Francisco, Ohio, Denver, and now I believe there's a group of academics who are looking to stage the play, do stage readings at their universities. The big one, the new stage version of it was in Berkeley, California. And for all these directors and librarians and university professors getting involved with happen here. Their primary rationale seems to be thinking about the current state of American politics and the 2016 election. They obviously saw connections between the play and Donald Trump and the rise of sort of this alternative fact, ideology that we see now. And it's interesting because the reviews of the plays that have been staged recently, or the readings, it's very clear to even audiences that this is supposed to be a commenting on Donald Trump. And if you read Winthrop's speeches to his audiences in the play, you could change a few nouns and you would say this is a Donald Trump speech. And so I think for them it's very clearly like they're trying to comment upon the idea that, all right, where are we going as a society, as a body politic, when someone like this could and then has come to power? And so that, to me, it's basically because of Trump. That's where we have this invigorated interest in the play, reinvigorated.
Have any of the Berkeley Rep and some of the others, have they brought in new elements? Have they tried to rewrite the script to either reflect the sort of 21st century concerns that we have, or to remedy any perceived flaws in the original?
From what I've been able to gather, there has been, Berkeley did some extensive rewriting. I don't know, to be honest, like what precisely they changed. I haven't seen the new play script at all just yet. From what I've gathered from some of the reviews and some of the firsthand comments, they've kept most of Lewis and Moffat's writing in place. They've changed some characters a little bit, cut out a few characters, but for all intents and purposes, it's very similar to the FTP productions that would have been performed in the 30s.
So in the 1930s, this meets with a rather mixed reception. What sense do you have of how people have responded to the revivals in 2016 and 2017 of this play?
Well, mainstream, I think it comes back to that sort of very mixed response that the play saw in the 30s. And I wrote this in my HowlRound piece. I mean, it's very easy in some ways for the Berkeley Rep in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the most liberal places in the United States, to do this play or in New York, because you're hitting that audience that already agrees with that perception of Trump as a danger, as a demagogue. There has been some, from what I've seen from individual theater or individual readings, there has been some pushback to the staging or the reading of this play. I think in Denver, there was for a time on I forget what theater is in Denver, but on their website they had this very extensive conversation between one of the representatives from the theater and someone who just accused the theater group of commenting upon the election and trying to sway people's opinions of, that because you're staging this play about a Donald Trump-like character, you're trying to say something about the election. And it's interesting too, like even outlets like the New York Times and the New Yorker have said, they've kind of echoed a lot of the criticism of the play from the 1930s of, yeah, okay, there's some interesting things to say here, but the play itself is not good. And what's the larger meaning attached to this? I think that's kind of fair. When I've taught the play a few times, and my students have often said it starts out really well and just kind of dies. So we're seeing a lot of the same criticism that theaters or in the 1930s today too. So.
Given this criticism and given your background studying the Federal Theater Project, a subject that you know pretty well, what do you think, what conclusions can you draw about political theater? What can we borrow from the FTP and productions like It Can't Happen Here? And what maybe is a bit of a cautionary tale here?
That's a great question. For me, it always is a helpful reminder to theaters and people in the theater community that you have to be prepared for criticism of your productions, whether that's justified or not. I think one of the interesting things about the Federal Theater Project is that because it was a government agency and because a lot of its productions were overtly political in nature, that perception, I think, often carried over to everything from its musicals to children's theater to its comedies. People saw it as, even when it maybe wasn't intentionally doing so, of engaging in political discourse. And I think then and I've often been critical of Hallie Flanagan a little bit. I respect Hallie Flanagan. It's not personal. But I think sometimes a lot of the brain trust of the FTP didn't quite understand how the public was responding to its productions. And so if you choose to engage in political theater, then you have to be prepared to address or even have the perception of your company change that everything now is political. Whether that's justified or not, or whether sometimes audiences are just eager to find a political message in something that may not even, might not be your intention as an actor or director, but it's still there, I think. I think as well, for me, I think part of why theaters came back to It Can't Happen Here was that there was this attempt by the FTP to get people thinking about their relationship to politics and the dangers of, or the very real dangers of fascism taking hold in the United States. And so I think for directors today, it's that sense of we can come together as a community, as an audience, and as directors and actors to have an impact on people and society. That was unique. And again, in my research of the current It Can't Happen Here's, that was also the impulse, I think, for a lot of people that, they understood that the politics were going to be part of the discussion, but they still wanted to do that. They still wanted to try to comment upon the current political situation. And I guess for me, like I like the potential of this play is to getting people to think about.
We'll post a link to Paul's article on HowlRound, as well as material relating to the original Federal Theater Project production of It Can't Happen Here. Paul, thank you so much.
Michael, this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit HowlRound.com and follow HowlRound and @TheaterHistory on Twitter. A big thank you to the staff at HowlRound who make this show possible. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.